Hello, everyone. It's Callie Persall, editor of Institutional Investing in Infrastructure, with Constantin Baack, CEO of MPC Capital. Today, we're just going to talk about the investment case for offshore support vessels in that market. So, Constantine, welcome back. I know it's been a few months since we chatted. Since then, I know the offshore support vessel market seems to be experiencing some pretty strong momentum, and it seems like it's on track to hit nearly 30 billion in 2025. So, what is just driving growth in this market and the offshore wind market more broadly?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me, Carly. Good to be back and good to discuss a new topic with you, the offshore support vessel market. And indeed, the market has been growing and there has been good momentum. Obviously, taking a step back, I would say, despite certain political headwinds from, amongst others, the US, and I would say also a general sense of caution surrounding new offshore wind projects in Europe as well, the growth momentum for offshore support vessels indeed remains strong. And the momentum is driven by a few factors. And in my view, it's largely driven by the fact that vessel investments have significantly been lagging behind offshore installation activity or capacity for that matter. And in many ways, that has been more a game of catch up, bringing modern eco-efficient tonnage to market in order to service the green offshore energy ecosystem, I would call it, with equally green and efficient vessels. So I think that's one aspect. Moreover, we are also seeing increasing demand driven by geographic diversification, I would call it, particularly in Asia, where offshore wind development is clearly accelerating. I'm sure we'll talk about geographic differences later on. Another important trend that will continue to gain relevance in my view is the servicing and also the decommissioning of first generation wind parks. These are early installations that reach kind of end of their initial life cycle, and there's a need for specialized vessels to service and to also, basically decommission these wind farms. And that is expected to grow substantially. And beyond the classical offshore wind market, we are also seeing that their versatile vessels are in demand, such as offshore service and survey vessels, vessels that we have ordered together with investment partners, with institutional capital. And those are being deployed in emerging, I would say, areas of the business like carbon capture or storage projects, as well as environmental monitoring initiatives. There are also several, and very recently, obviously, this has been accelerating, several programs for the protection of North Sea infrastructure. Obviously, there is concern about, certain infrastructure elements, and this is definitely something where we see. Obviously, it's partly a Navy project, but they also need support in identifying certain weaknesses, etc. So there we also see quite some demand. And in summary, I would say, while political and regulatory uncertainties continue to persist, and no doubt about it, the fundamentals of the OSV market remain robust and also supported by delayed vessel investments, as I said, lagging behind, as well as geographic expansion and life cycle considerations. We see there is significant growth ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. I also wanted to just compliment you on the background that you have set up there. I think, it's not something that we talk about enough, the OSV market. Obviously, it's an integral part of the offshore wind space. Can you just talk about what part OSVs really play in the offshore wind market? And you kind of mentioned before, in terms of regionally, just expand on where you're seeing the most demand for these vessels.
Absolutely. I mean, offshore support vessels, or OSVs for that matter, they can be basically deployed across the entire life cycle of a wind park. Although, the intensity and nature of their use varies, and that basically depends on the phase and also the vessel type. There are even within the OSVs a variety of vessels. But these vessels, they, for example, play a critical role in commissioning, servicing, and also conducting certain survey work when it comes to seabed analysis, etc. And whether that is related to turbine installations, the seabed, as I said, or other infrastructure components. There's a versatile use of these units, and that is also a distinction compared to, let's say, the big wind turbine installation vessels. They have one task and can only be used at a certain point in time in a life cycle of a wind farm, whereas these vessels have versatile functionality, and that makes them indispensable throughout the development and operational phase of offshore wind projects. So very important assets, and I can tell you that in the past years there were basically refurbished fisher boats used for these kind of work. So it's really it's also an upgrade in terms of quality of ships. And offshore wind itself, I would say, is by now a well-established segment, particularly in the North Sea and the Baltic Sea. And these regions have developed what I would say is more mature markets that not only drive demand, but also set the standards for vessel capabilities, safety requirements, and innovation. So there are also aspects surrounding those topics. And the maturity in Europe has certainly created what I would call a benchmark for what is expected in terms of vessel performance, regulatory compliance, and that has been pushing the industry towards a more advanced and safer solutions. And beyond Europe, Asia is certainly emerging as another major growth market, especially Taiwan, for example. Taiwan benefits from wind conditions that are quite similar to those in the North Sea. So it's a very similar market in terms of wind conditions. And offshore wind is widely accepted as a very reliable and sustainable energy source. So Taiwan is certainly up there. So are other Asian countries. And the geographic expansion, to your question also earlier, combined with, I would call it, evolving technical advancements, but also requirements, that continues to shape the OSV market and basically reinforces the need for modern, adaptable, and certainly eco-efficient vessels like the ones that we have just recently ordered.
Very interesting, and definitely something to keep an eye on. So, just what should investors understand about the OSV market? Is now an ideal time to invest in these vessels? And are there any challenges or opportunities that they should be aware of?
I would start with saying, like every shipping segment, the health of the offshore support vessel market is ultimately also linked or determined by the balance of supply and demand. And obviously, so you need to drill down the supply side and the demand side. Globally, the outlook for offshore wind vessel demand has pointed to a shortage of suitable vessels, and important is not just vessels, but suitable vessels. And this has triggered a wave of ordering activity in 2023 and 2024, as many stakeholders rush with a goal to close the gap between installation needs on the one hand and vessel availability on the other hand. However, more recently, we have seen I would say, a bit of a cooling off in the new build activity. This is largely due to a more reserved production outlook, for example, in the US, as a result of the new administration, taking a certain view in the US on the offshore wind side of things. And this has led to a reduced demand and in some cases lower than expected also employment levels for vessels that were ordered during the peak optimism phase, so to say. And in terms of different markets, I think that's important. The North Sea is different to the US. Taiwan is a different market. So they follow also certain regional drivers, which is very important to note. So, a lot of the pushback recently has come from the US, but I think in Europe, there's still pretty much demand. And that said, the mid to long-term demand outlook remains, at least as our assessment is concerned, strong, particularly for the right vessel type. And that's also a matter of, vessels that are modern, that are versatile, that are also tailored to the evolving needs of offshore wind and adjacent markets. And we believe this this will continue to create attractive opportunities. And we hear that from the end users. We see that also from the capacity that is being projected for the years ahead. And we also anticipate, as another layer, a secondary market emerging with, for example, resale opportunities from owners who ordered vessels without securing employment, basically without a charter, without a customer having a firm need for the ship, just banking on the gap between supply and demand, or without having the right organizational infrastructure to manage them effectively. So I think this is another aspect. And in short, I would say, while the short-term dynamics, they may fluctuate, and they will fluctuate, the fundamentals for well-positioned vessels remain compelling, and we see strategic opportunities that will continue to arise from those developments as far as supply and demand is concerned, with the right assets and capabilities. So we are still excited about the sector. We do believe there's an attractive outlook. However, you also need to know your way around in order to find the right asset for the right market.